Good evening. Can everyone hear me? I think you can. Welcome, and thank you very much to the Hotchkiss School for hosting this forum event. And in particular, I've been told to thank Diana Jones, who was instrumental in all the logistics of putting something like this together. And I'm Claudia Kane. I'm the Vice President of the Salisbury Forum, and I want to welcome you to our first lecture of our 7th season. We're very grateful for all of that, and you'll see in your program that our first lecture is named the Frank DeChambeau Lecture in honor of our first board president, who is here somewhere, possibly. Anyhow, thank you, Frank, for leading us forward. And we are a local nonprofit, and our mission really is to present 4 lectures like this one each year, and we hope that we bring you speakers who will inform you, who will educate you, who will inspire you, who will maybe even provoke you, and that this will result in some conversations among yourselves. And I want to thank everybody here who has supported us, because we are supported by donations, and you will find, coincidentally, in your program, an envelope into which you can place a check and become a supporter of the forum. And so I encourage all of you to do that, and thank all of you who have done so far. And I also want to just thank our institutional supporters who have been with us from the beginning, the Hotchkiss School, the Salisbury School, and the Friends of the Scoville Library. For more information on what we do, you can visit our website. That's in our program. And our next program is going to be on Friday, November 4th at Housatonic Valley Regional High School. And we'll have Dr. Anthony Cronman, who will be speaking on humanities in the age of disenchantment. So tonight's program is going to follow our usual routine. We have Dr. Mark Plotkin, who will speak for about 45 minutes. We'll have a short break. We'll be collecting questions from the audience, and you have an index card and pencil. Board members will be going around and collecting those. And at that time, we have a number of students in the audience who may leave before the question and answer. So if you see an exodus, don't be alarmed. We know that it's happening. And following the talk, there will be a reception out in the lobby area where you can meet Dr. Plotkin. You can speak with your neighbors. And there will be books and so on that Dr. Plotkin has written available for purchase. So I'm not going to go on and on here. I'm going to introduce Dr. Plotkin. There's a full bio in your program. He's a renowned ethnobotanist, and he has degrees from Harvard, Yale, and Tufts. And he's going to speak to us about his passion, which is the Amazonian rainforest, the value to all of us, and the value of the indigenous tribes who live there. And I heard him interviewed on Robin Hood Radio this morning, and he said something which really resonated with me, and that is that it's really incumbent upon all of us to connect with nature. So if you can't get to the Amazonian rainforest, you can simply step outside, and I think that will serve you well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to him, and thank you and welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'd like to thank the Salisbury and the Hotchkiss people for making this visit possible. And I'd like to recognize 2 special friends who have something to do with what I'm going to talk about. That's Lawrence Hollander and Rick Harlow. You guys here, raise your hand. Now I'm here to talk about the Amazon. I want to talk about why we should care, and I want to talk about how we're protecting it. Because I was told there's going to be a lot of students in the audience tonight, I wanted to put something a little different and put a personal spin on it. This is the picture that I saw in New England in a very cold classroom in September of 1974. And that class was taught by the great ethnobotanist Richard Evans Schultes. And he put this picture up and he said, here you see 3 Yukuna Indians. They're doing the Kayari dance to keep away the forces of darkness. All of them are totally intoxicated on a highly hallucinogenic potion made from the Banisteriopsis liana. The one on the right has a Harvard degree. Next slide, please. Now that image got me hooked. Hooked on plants, hooked on Indians, and hooked on the Amazon. I didn't say next, go back to that slide, please. Now I want you to look at three things, because I'm going to refer back to this image. I want you to look at the grass skirts, I want you to look at the bark cloth shirts, and I want you to look at the hands that are painted blue. Next slide, please. The first one is a quote. I'm the president of the Amazon Conservation Team. We are a very unique organization. We protect the rainforest by partnering with the peoples that actually live there. To date, we have partnered with 32 tribes to map, manage, and protect over 70 million acres of ancestral rainforests. Next. So, being something of an iconoclast, I wanted to start out with something that has nothing to do with ethnobotany, or even the Amazon. I wanted to start out with my favorite fungus. This is a fungus called cordyceps. Cordyceps lives quiescent on the forest floor and waits for insects and arachnids to go past. Once they've done that, the fungus attaches itself to the insect exoskeleton. Once it's done that, the fungus burns a hole in the insect exoskeleton. Once it's done that, the fungus burns a hole in the insect exoskeleton and inserts itself inside. Once inside the insect exoskeleton, the fungus proceeds to devour virtually all of the insect's non-vital organs. Once it's done that, the fungus travels up to the insect brain, eating only a part of the insect brain, causing the insect to climb to the top of the tallest tree in the forest. Once it's done that, the fungus eats the rest of the insect brain, thereby killing the insect, thereby causing the exoskeleton to split open, thereby allowing the fungus to release its spores 120 feet above the forest floor. Scientists refer to fungi as lower organisms. You see why ethnobotanists don't read science fiction. Now what's in it for us? The fact of the matter is that this fungus, cordyceps, is the source of the first immunosuppressant drug. It's the drug used in every hospital in Connecticut and Massachusetts, indeed the industrialized world, to keep your immune system at bay, so transplant surgery has become an everyday occurrence. And it's all thanks to this little fungus. Next. Now this is the greatest danger on Earth. This is Staph aureus. Staph aureus has more weapons to kill you than the Batmobile. And here's the really bad news. Staph aureus is on your hands, and Staph aureus is up your nose. Now, if you're a healthy, well-balanced human being with a nice immune system, it's not a problem. But if you have your immune system suppressed through chemotherapy, if you're in an automobile accident and the stuff gets mushed from your nose into your bloodstream, you are in real trouble. How many people died in 9/11? 3,000. How many people died from drug-resistant bacterial infections in this country? Somewhere between 100 and 300,000 people a year. Next. This is the greatest threat facing our species, and it's getting worse. Next. This is flesh-eating bacteria. Now, flesh-eating bacteria is streptococcus, but if it swaps genes with staphylococcus, and it's going to happen, it's going to melt the human race like a wax museum on fire. Next. And this is the future. This is a Wai Indian man treating his son for a bacterial infection of the ear. In the internet age, in the biotech age, 80% of all our antibiotics come from nature. And if we protect nature, and we nurture nature, and we learn from nature, principally by asking the indigenous peoples who know nature far better than we will have new antibiotics to beat back this menace. Next. But there's many examples of the gifts from nature that keep on giving. Can we kill the spot? I want people to look at the pictures, not at me. This is the rosy periwinkle. It grows here in the summer. It's native to Madagascar. Next. It's the source of 6 different anti-tumor alkaloids, some of which are a 90% cure for childhood leukemia. Next. This is Mexican yams, compounds from this plant were the building blocks of the birth control pills. Next. And this is leeches. As our population ages, we need more drugs for coagulation. Drugs that retard coagulation, drugs that enhance coagulation. Where to find them? Mother Nature. Leeches have anticoagulants in their saliva. And what's really interesting,
and absolute proof of evolution, should anybody outside of the Midwest need it, is that every leech has a different complement of anticoagulants in their saliva. Now, nobody's ever been able to explain to me why God had time to sit down and give every leech different anticoagulants. Next. But we grow things bigger in the Amazon. This is an Amazon leech with a new drug being developed from its saliva called Amentin. Next. Now this is how blood coagulates. Can we turn out those lights, please? This is how blood coagulates. When I was at Harvard, I was told if you ever have to show a really technical, incomprehensible slide, you just shift the onus to the audience by saying, now, as you can clearly see, what this shows is how blood coagulates. And depending on how you cut the mustard, blood coagulates in 8 or 16 or 32-step process. Water turns to ice, ice turns to water. It's a one-step process. Coagulation is infinitely more difficult, which means that if you're trying to enhance coagulation or retard coagulation, the more steps there are, the more opportunities you have, and the more anticoagulants or procoagulants you have, the better off you are. So as you can clearly see, there's plenty of opportunities for using these natural product drugs. Next. But leeches aren't the only thing that have anticoagulants in their saliva. So do vampire bats. And those of you who've read some of my stuff know, I know this firsthand because I've been bitten by a vampire bat. And when you are bitten by a vampire bat, you bleed like a stuck pig. Compounds from vampire bat saliva are being commercialized as we speak, but they have a better press agent than do the leeches, because the compound that's being brought to market from vampire bat saliva goes under the trade name of Draculin. Next. Now, here's what ethnobotanists do for a living. Here you see Professor Schultes taking a snuff from a Yukuna Indian. And when Professor Schultes was asked what's the difference between an ethnobotanist and an anthropologist, he said the answer is simple. When the shaman leans forward and passes you the hallucinogenic brew, the anthropologist says, no, 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 I can't do that because I'll lose my objectivity, whereas the ethnobotanist says, yeehaw. Next. So what have hallucinogens done for us lately? Well, Professor Schultes was the one who did the seminal work on magic mushrooms in Oaxaca in the 30s. Next. And magic mushrooms not only led to much of rock music, but they also led to some important medicines. Professor Schultes' wife, Dorothy, was having dinner with Albert Hofmann, another famous natural product chemist, and she took a little compound out of her purse and knocked some pills into her hand, and Hofmann said, what do you got there? And she passed him the pill bottle, and he said, oh, Biscuit, a beta blocker, you must have a heart condition. He says, you know, beta blockers are all based originally on the compounds they took from the hallucinogenic mushrooms your husband collected in Mexico. Next. Another interesting compound from the rainforest is curare. Curare is painted on the tips of blow darts to give them their deadly effectiveness. Next. From this curare we get what's called D-tubocurarine chloride, which is used as a muscle relaxant in abdominal surgery. Next. The newest curare that's caught the interest of modern chemists are the stuff that's extracted from the skin of poison dart frogs. If you're wondering where poison dart frogs got their name, it's because they are used to paint on the tips of darts, not in the Amazon, but in the Chocó, Western Colombia, down into Ecuador, a very different rainforest formation, frankly, in much worse shape than is the Amazon. And next, compounds from their skin is found to stop pain, but it does it in a completely different therapeutic pathway in the human body, meaning it's non-addictive. If you look at morphine and other opiate derivatives, they cause all sorts of physical problems, constipation, skin problems, respiratory diseases, respiratory problems, and they're very, very, very addictive and cause many problems in our cities. But this operates, as I said, in a different therapeutic pathway, which means that it's potentially $1 billion drug. More importantly, it alleviates human suffering, and perhaps as importantly, it does so without many of the ugly side effects of painkillers we now use. Next. Now, we've all read about frogs disappearing. Frogs are disappearing around the world, probably of terrestrial vertebrate groups. They are the worst off. You may think, well, that's a shame, but they're kind of ugly and they're kind of slimy. But here's the bad news. frogs, we are now finding out, have incredible potential as sources of chemical compounds. Next. This is my favorite frog of all. This is the giant Amazon green monkey frog. How many people saw my IMAX film, Amazon, a couple of years ago? Anybody see it? Okay, but everybody's seen IMAX films, right? You know what IMAX films are like? You're going through the rapids and you want to throw up. You're flying over the mountains and you want to throw up. The end. No story, no science, no character. So when I was approached to do this IMAX film, I wasn't really interested until I found out that the script was being written by Lauren McIntyre. Now, Lauren McIntyre was one of the two greatest Amazon explorers of the 20th century. In fact, the source lake of the Amazon in the Peruvian Andes was found by him and named after him, Laguna McIntyre. So Lauren was lost on the Brazil-Colombia border about 25 years ago, was rescued by a group of Indians who'd never seen a white man, followed them into the rainforest. They entered a clearing. They took out palm leaf baskets. They opened the baskets. Out of the palm leaf baskets, they took out giant green monkey frogs, and they began licking them. Well, they turned out to be hallucinogenic. Now, Lauren wrote about this, forgot about it. A couple years later, this is read by another friend of mine who was an editor for High Times magazine. You see that ethnobotanists have friends in all sorts of strange cultures, not just in the rainforest. He decided to go down there and find these frogs and give it a whirl, or give it a lick. And he did. And he wrote, and I quote, "My blood pressure went through the roof. I thought I was having a heart attack. I passed out in a heap. I woke up in a hammock 6 hours later. I felt like God for 2 days." Okay, not a bad trade-off if you think about it. But the article was written by an Italian chemist with a subscription to High Times magazine. He said, I'm not really interested. I'm not really interested in the theological aspects of the green monkey frog. What's this about the change in blood pressure? So he's developing a new blood pressure medicine based on peptides in the skin of the green monkey frog. It's like the arrow poison. We don't need arrow poison in this country, but through this work we identify important and unique compounds and we use them for different purposes in our own society. Next. Here's one of the saddest stories of all. This is the gastric brooding frog. This is from Australia. This was collected about 30 years ago. And the frog produces the eggs, and the eggs are then swallowed, and the little ones are barfed up out of the mouth of the parents. So the tadpole stage is completely protected in the body of the parent frog. Well, somebody reading this a couple years after the discovery said, wait a minute, if they can nurture the frogs, the tadpoles in their stomach, they're turning off their gastric juices. Now, anybody who's ever had heartburn or acid reflux knows the market for drugs that can turn off your gastric juices. And so they said, Eureka, we're going to make $1 billion. They went running back there, but too late. The frog had gone extinct. Next. Now let's focus on the Amazon from here on out. This has been described as the greatest expression of life on Earth. Next. However, the greatest expression of life on Earth is being trashed and burned as I speak. Next. Tomorrow's miracle medicines, or potential miracle medicines, are literally going up in smoke with the incredible rates of deforestation that you've all read about. Next. Here's a slide taken up in space, which shows the incredible carbon coming off the Amazon because of the rates of deforestation, primarily in Brazil. Next. You have to remember that in the rainforest, the rivers are essential. They are transportation, they're the source of protein. Remember that in the Amazon, the major source of protein is fish. It's not meat. Next. And these rivers in the western Amazon come off the glaciers. Now, we all saw Al Gore's film, and he talked about the disappearing glaciers. But old Al didn't explain why that's important. Well, here's why it's important. Because if your rivers are coming off the glaciers and the glaciers are melting, it meant the rivers are going to be too high for a while and then too low forever after. Next. The well-being of the Indians is not just tied to the forest, it's tied to the rivers as well. Next. As I said, the rivers are the real roads in the rainforest, at least historically speaking, or prehistorically speaking. Next. And as I said, fish are the major source of protein in the forest. Next. Now here's my headquarters in the Northeast Amazon. Okay, this is not on the riverbank. This is 40 feet above the riverbank. So we hear about global warming. It's a term I don't like. I prefer climate change. Because hot is hotter, and cold is colder, and rain is rainier, and dry is drier. Next. So with these rains, the rivers come into the village, and if you think it looks bad when they're in a village, look what happens when they retreat. Next. So again, we're talking about climate change and the price we'll eventually pay. These people are paying the price now. It's real, and it's in front of your nose, and you can see it, unless you're the governor of Texas. Next. I'm sorry, Texas is on fire, and this guy's saying, comparing himself to Galileo, saying, I'm the only guy who's man enough to speak out against this nonsense. So, this is a major tributary of the Amazon. Look like climate change to you? Next. Imagine what this smells like. Now remember, as I told you, protein is the major source, fish is the major source of protein in the Amazon. This literally stinks. And it literally means people are going hungry. When I was in the Southwest Amazon 3 years ago, major drought, major increase in waterborne diseases. It may seem odd that in a drought you have waterborne diseases because the water's concentrated, it's not moving. The airport was closed because of the smoke of burning forests. The hospital was filled with people with breathing problems by people who didn't have breathing problems. I mean, not just people who were asthmatics, but all sorts of people went because of the quality or the lack of quality of the air. Next. Here's the answer. The shamans. 5% of the Amazon is national parks. World Wildlife Fund raised to work. Conservation National raised to work. Nature Conservancy raised to work. Really have had a large focus on national parks, and that's good. But national parks are 5% of the Amazon. The focus of our work at the Amazon Conservation Team is on indigenous lands. Indigenous lands are 25% of the Amazon. And you know what? In the case of indigenous lands, the park guards are already in place. These people have a far greater tie to the land and the forest and the rivers than we do. Why not empower them to protect these ecosystems? If you look at a map of Central America, forest exists primarily in two places: national parks, and many of those are going fast, and indigenous lands. It's not by accident, it's not by happenstance. Indigenous peoples live in these forests and they protect them. So if indigenous culture is the glue that holds the forest down, what's the glue that holds the culture together? The shamans. When missionaries went into Indian communities, whether it was here in Connecticut or in the Amazon, they found two leaders, chief and the shaman. Essentially the separation of church and state. The founding fathers didn't invent the idea of separating church and state. And they went after the shaman because that was the culture glue. When you disempower the shaman, the culture almost always falls apart. Next. So, the greatest shamans that I've ever met live in the most remote corners of the Amazon today. Next. Now, when I was a grad student, there was still a lingering discussion of where Indians came from. You know, the consensus was pretty much they'd come across the Bering Strait. And this is a scene from Monte Verde, the oldest site. It's in Chile. It's 17,000 years ago. And at the site, they were found to be living in mammoth skin tents and growing boldo, which is a liver cleanser you can buy in any health food store here in Connecticut. Next. They were figured to look pretty much like the Inuit did until recently, living in seal skins. Next. But here's the problem. Kennewick Man. About 8 years ago, some canoers in Washington State were going down a river after a rain, and they found a skeleton sticking out of a riverbank. So they called the police, and the police said, yeah, it's a murder, but they looked at it with more trained eyes than the canoeists. When they dug the body out of the riverbank, it had a wooden spear tip in the hip. It's a Caucasian skeleton with a wooden spear tip in the hip. So he said, yeah, it was a murder, but it's 100 years ago. So they sent it to the lab to get it dated. It came back 5,000 years old. Now, there weren't any white people walking around in Washington State 5,000 years ago. So they said, recheck those results. And they did 5,000 years ago. Recheck those results. They did 5,000 years ago. So we took the skull to the Smithsonian, next, and compared it to a Palo Indian skull. And it's clearly a Caucasian skull. And at the Smithsonian, they decided to recreate what Kennewick Man looked like, next. So they put the muscles on it. And I thought, if I put the skin on this, I know just what it looks like. Next. Back. Next. It's a dead ringer. So clearly, Kennewick Man beamed down to the Pacific Northwest from someplace different than the Bering Strait. Next. But the world of the shamans is one which a Western scientific education does not adequately prepare you for. I had the great good fortune to work with Professor Schultes, who was certainly the most open-minded person when it came to understanding and appreciating not only indigenous culture, not only rainforest, but the idea that there are other ways of knowing and other realities that most of us will never have the chance to experience. Next. But work with these types of cultures that are so different from our own is not quick and it's not easy. We are Americans, most of us, and we want to get stuff done. We want to cut to the chase. We don't want to do the dances and breathe the magic smoke and all this other stuff. Just give us a cure for diabetes. But I've learned long and hard that it takes patience, tenacity, and luck. Next. So here I am 30 years later, still working with the same people and still learning. Next. And here's our vice president being treated by a local shaman. And it's living with these people, working with these people, hunting with these people, eating with these people, going through ceremonies with these people, that they only begin to trust you and only begin to open up to you and only begin to teach you some of what they know. Next. Here's the most important picture you'll ever see about rainforest conservation. I took this from a little plane flying over the Xingu Reserve in Brazil. And the top half of the picture is the Xingu Reserve. That's where the Indians live. The bottom half is where the white guys live. The line running through the middle marks the eastern border of the reserve. Now look at that picture. Top half of the picture, you have 14 Indian tribes living there. It's rainforest from horizon to horizon. As soon as you get to the border, there isn't a single tree. Those little spots, those are skinny cattle. Forest has been cut down to plant soy to sell to the Chinese. Top half Indians, bottom half white guys. Top half carbon sequestered, bottom half carbon released in the atmosphere. Doesn't get any clearer than this. Next. Now here's the same picture from a different perspective. Look at the state of Mato Grosso in the lower right-hand corner. Mato Grosso in Portuguese means great forest. Brown is deforestation. In other words, there is no forest left in the state of Great Forest except for that green tongue. And that green tongue is the Xingu Reserve. So where you have 14 tribes of Indians, you have rainforest. Where you don't have Indians, you don't have rainforest. Next. But we at the Amazon Conservation Team do not believe that Indians know everything, that Indians can do everything, that shamans can cure everything. We know there is an extremely, indeed essential role for Western knowledge, technology, science, methodology, what have you. So, like much of ethnobotany, the answer isn't always the medicine man. And it's certainly not just the microchip. The sweet spot is somewhere in between. Now this is a Xingu Indian looking at the computer, which you've never seen before. This is about 7 years ago. Next. Here's Chief Almeida, the Suri tribe of Brazil, with the head of Google Earth, Rebecca Moore, the head of outreach at Google Earth, teaching him how to use a computer. Next. And here's the future if we get it right. It's not just our job at the Amazon Conservation Team to bring Google Earth down and have them teach the Indians and learn stuff from the Indians, but to empower the Indians themselves to be able to take control of their cultural and environmental destiny with their own computers. Next. I want to show you the power of this approach. And the power of this approach is evident using our own technology, which is satellites from space and the marking we've been doing as an organization in partnership with Google. Next. I want to focus on the state of Amapá. This is the northeastern Brazilian Amazon. Next. Let's zone it. Next. Next. Okay, what you see here is light green that predominates. That is state land. And on the upper left is the Tumucumaki National Park. It's the biggest national park in the Amazon. It's the size of Belgium. Next. Now that's where the Indians live. That's a Tumucumaki Indigenous Reserve. And it's roughly the same size as a national park. So you have the Tumucumaki National Park and the Tumucumaki Indigenous Reserve, both the size of Belgium. Next. Somebody said a couple of years ago, well, you've got 4,000 Indians living there. There's no way they can use all this land. Let's take 90% of it away and open it up for development. So the Indians came to us for help. And our job was to figure out how much they knew and how much of the land they used. Next. Now this is before Google Earth. This is about 7 years ago. And we got on a map, and we drew in the rivers, and we said, now do you guys have names for any of these rivers? Next. Can you show where your sacred sites are? Next. So we made it into a map. Next. We said, now do you know where your medicinal plants come from? Next. So this was all in their head. So as they make this transition from a pre-literate to a literate society, we have an extraordinary opportunity, and I would say a duty, to help these people write it down so it is not lost. Next. So it started out looking like this. Next. Now it looks like this. That's how much they know. Okay. What was terra incognita from a Western standpoint now has 2,000 icons on it, each of which has an explanation that goes with it. So let's drill down a little further. Next. And look at what these icons can tell us. Next. Next. Okay, we're going to go to this lake here in the west, and if you tap on that symbol, next. Next. Here's what happens. You get an explanation. Next. And the explanation in this case is in Portuguese, which is of course the national language of Brazil, and in Apalai, which is the tribe that lives there. And there's 4 tribes living in this indigenous reserve, and so every icon has its explanation in the national language Portuguese and the local language, which is Apalai, Waiwai, and 2 others. But it's a validator because these people, in particular the children who are literate now, have never seen anything written down in their language other than the Bible, and have no educational materials which don't focus on pigs, chickens, and the life of Jesus Christ. So what we have here is not just a map. What we have is a validation of their culture, proof of the wisdom of the elders, a technological tool, a teaching tool, and a pre-management plan. Next. 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 That's 10 million acres of rainforest that's been saved because of this approach. And this has been done now throughout the northern Amazon. As I said, we've done this with 32 tribes and have protected over 70 million acres of rainforest. Now, a map in and of itself is a tool. It's not an answer, but allows these people to stake their claim. In the Xingu, which I showed you on that one side, the border of the reserve is as sharp as a knife's edge. On the other side, it's like this. So since virtually every tree has been cut down around there, the ranchers, the timber barons come in and cut down tree on Indian lands. Well, even the Indians didn't know what they had title to, but as part of this mapping process, we not only mark the border, we put up signs and have maps to show where every inch of territory belongs to the Indians or doesn't. So the power of this is hard to overemphasize. And the empowering of the people themselves is hard to overemphasize. But as I said, a map is not the answer. It's a tool, which is why we go an approach we call map, manage, protect. Once we have a map, the next step is to manage and plan based on the map and expanding upon the map. And then protect. We develop a program for international park guards, taking Indians and training them to international standards as park guards. Not just forest management, fire control, first aid, and this is a completely new approach because what it does, essentially, is marry ancient shamanic wisdom with 21st century U.S. know-how. And that's the sweet spot. So it's not one or the other having the answers, it's blending them together. It's giving Indians technology, but letting them develop the means to do so to perpetuate and protect their culture and their forest. Next. So here's what we started out with. Next. Let's look at that national park next door, the Tumukamaki National Park. It's the biggest national park in the Amazon. It's the size of Belgium, and it's got 3 park guards. Total. Okay? And where do the park guards live? 100 miles away. Why? Because there's no air conditioning, and there's no cold beer, and there's no clean beds in the national park. So put yourself in this position. You're a Colombian drug runner, a narcotraficante, or you're a gun runner. Where do you want to do your illegal stuff? Do you want to do it in a national park the size of Belgium with 3 park guards who live 150 miles away? Or do you want to do it in the indigenous reserve where there's 4,000 park guards, they're naked, they're painted red, they carry poison-tipped arrows, and they're really pissed off? Seems to me the choice is easy. So this is why I think the future of the rainforest is on indigenous lands. And not only do Indians have a major stake in protecting these forests, but guess what they want to protect next? The adjacent forests. Because if they don't, all the forest goes. And that's where the park guards go in, to move them to the national parks, to move them to the buffer zones, to move them to the state parks. And that's how you grow out rainforest conservation in terms of biocultural corridors. Next. So if you fly over this national park, next, here's what you see. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of gold mines. It's a tragedy of the commons. Next. So the Indians can be the eyes and ears on the ground, and looking at this map, they told me, if you fly down, you see that there is a legal airstrip that's been put in at the base of that mountain in the upper right. And I said, I don't see anything looking at the photographs. So our Brazil director, Bosco, chartered a small plane, flew low. Next. Right there, the Indians pointed to. Next. Next. And here's what they found. An illegal airstrip. That's how the bad guys get in, and that's how they do their bad stuff. So, next, we took the coordinates, gave it to the military, they flew in and blew it up. Next. So here's where I started. Right here in New England, in a dark auditorium, looking at Professor Schultes doing the Kayari dance, as he called it. Hands painted blue, feet painted blue. Next. And he was a great photographer, and he said that this dance went on for 2.5 days. And every 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it was a different dance. About half the dances were forest spirits. These are the big ears. Next. The other half the dances were forest animals, or plants. This is the dance of the butterflies. Every dance had different music. Every dance had a different step. Next. This is the devil dance. This is the fertility dance. Next. When I asked them, how did you keep going for 2.5 days? When they say 2.5 days, they don't mean 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 12. They mean 2.5 days, 56 hours. And when I said to Professor Schultes, how did you keep going for 2.5 days? He says, well, we take snuff. Now, this was in 1951. Next. 2011. Same dance, same people. Next. And these Indians still do the dance. Ricardo has done it. It still lasts for 2.5 days. And they say this dance propitiates the forest spirits. It protects the animals. and it holds up the sky. And as long as they do the dance, they'll have forest. And as long as they have forest, the world's a better place. Next. So I don't usually show these pictures publicly, but when I was told there were students in the audience who were figuring out what to do in the world, and I know from having students of my own, 2 daughters, who feel that the world is a pretty beaten up place and there's no romance and there's no adventure left, it's simply not true, because the Yukunas still do their dance. Next. So we hear about the rainforest, and it is indeed the ecosystem with the most incredible number of species, the most beautiful species of plants and animals. But I think the idea of protecting the rainforest just for aesthetic purposes alone is short-sighted. I think conservation of the Amazon, conservation of old-growth forest in Connecticut, and conservation of ecosystems everywhere has to be first and foremost a spiritual exercise. We all live better knowing there's wildlands on this planet. Far afield like the Amazon, right here at home in New England. And not only does it speak to us spiritually, if you have an interest in clean air and clean water and medicines when you're sick, you have a real stake in ecosystems everywhere. Next. And I think the fate of the ecosystems where I work, in fact, I know that the fate of the ecosystems where I work is very heavily dependent on the people that live there. Thank you very much.